From the #1 best-selling author of Life Rescripted, you're now tuning in to the Year of Purpose podcast. I'm Zephan Moses Blacksburg. So I've got Gary Mancuso with me, and Gary's awesome because he was introduced to me by someone else who had been on our show, and that was Sean Dasani, episode YOP 026. It's called Born to Transform. Great episode. And so Gary was introduced to me by Sean, and he was looking to basically take his book to the next level. He's got an awesome story. It's exactly why we wanted to bring him on the show and share his story with everybody. So Gary, thanks so much for being here today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Zephan.
Yeah, so, the first thing I want to really dive into is just a little bit of your backstory, because I know that your book came out of a relatively large trip and retreat from the common lifestyle that everyone's used to. So maybe if you could, Gary, just tell us leading up to your decision and your journey, where were you in life, what was going on, where were you working, and things like that.
Well, before I left, I was working as head of business development at a foreign exchange trading room at a large regional bank here in Los Angeles. And there I developed an automated payment service that outsourced the processing of certain types of payments for a particular company niche. And it did really well. Nobody else was doing it. And so that was kind of a fun ride and a journey in and of itself. And it gave me a lot of freedom to travel while I was working. And so I started noticing as I was traveling that there was a lot of really kind of sad things taking place in many of the places I was visiting. That I'd go to these supposedly pristine paradises, like out in the South Pacific, what have you, and I would see that the islands, the island cultures, and the environments were being just degraded far more, I think, than most people even imagined. And so even though I would come back to work and I really enjoyed what I was doing, I was living here in LA, I had a nice home right on the coast, I was happily married, had lots of friends, used to have dinner parties a lot at my home here. I certainly was enjoying myself. But I thought, I need to get out there and really experience the sort of the beauty and the awesomeness of the world while it's still there to be able to see, because it's just changing so fast and a lot of it's being degraded so fast and so badly. There's a lot of good things too going on with the modernization that's spreading, but a lot of it is not so good. So I just dropped everything. So I quit my career, sold my home. My ex and I, it's not my ex, we sold our cars, put everything else in storage, and we set out on a long journey.
Well, that's quite a decision to make. I mean, I feel like not many people are fortunate enough to be in a circumstance where they can, put things on hold, especially financially. I know that that's one of the big things that scares so many people. But at the same time, I think you've got a great point there with, there are many cultures and places and civilizations in the world that are slowly starting to disappear. We see it. There's actually a show, I believe, on CNN with featuring Bill Weir called The Wonderlist. And, they are exploring places that are kind of like these, I wouldn't call them lost cities, but they'll certainly be lost cities in the near future. And so people really are missing out on this adventure and just seeing everything that life has to offer. What were some of the fears or things going into that decision process of, we're going to get ready to travel the world? Like, I mean, did you have concern with coming back and not being able to find a job? Was there concern with, is the money going to run out? What happened there?
Well, of course, you have, I had all these, these are all natural concerns. I certainly wasn't well off enough to think of early retirement or anything even close to that. So it wasn't that kind of a situation. So I was definitely taking a big risk, so to speak, by short-circuiting my career, which is kind of on the fast track, right in the middle of it, to completely uproot and disconnect from what I was doing. But I've always been pretty resourceful, and I have had several periods of my life where I have taken off and done long journeys, but typically they would be, for months, not for years.
Right.
So this is a little different magnitude. And I just felt that First off, I just had to do it. It was a dream of mine. Well, number one, I've always wanted to know the world and experience it and have the freedom and time to do it. And then secondly, I just felt like if I didn't do it now, whatever the cost, it would just be too late. Because someday, let's say I waited till the time was right when I was set up for life or ready to retire someday or something like that, it'd be too late. A lot of the color and the awesomeness that's left in the world, and a lot of the vestiges of the past. We could still see past humanity, the way we were 15,000 years ago, or the way we were back in the biblical times, or the way we were back in the what we call the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages. We can still see all of that.
Right.
Time travel is still available to us, so to speak. But that's all going to disappear. And I felt that even though I was taking a big financial risk in many ways, that it was worth it, and I just figured out when I got back how to get back going again.
I think you said a really cool thing there. You said time travel is still available to us. And I think that that's one of the biggest reasons why people really should take this risk is that if you're, whether this means leaving a job, whether this means taking a leap and trying a new job, whether this means, in your case, traveling the world, I think that knowing that time travel is still available to us, that we still have time left to go back and recover from any risk that we might take and fail at this point, I think that should be a huge motivator for anybody out there who's trying to take the leap. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I agree. I agree.
Cool.
That was a real good answer for you, wasn't it, Stefan? um, you're taking the term time travel and using it in a slightly different way, and it makes sense, of course, as a motivation for people to do what they want to do and live their dream and go for it, whatever that happens to be. That's one way. I was using it in a way also, though, to refer to the ability for us to actually go back and see different eras and epochs of humanity and the world itself. Whether it's, I went to spend a lot of my time in the great wildernesses of the world. Whether it was in the Congo or Papua New Guinea or Borneo or in the Amazon, or the pole, down by the Arctic or the Antarctic. So that's what I meant by time travel, in the sense that you can see the past still, and you don't need some kind of futuristic time machine to do it. You could just, you get on an airplane or a boat or a train or, however you want to do it, and you just got to kind of get out there to places that a little bit off-piste.
Right, right. But let me ask this real quick.
Sure.
Why is it so important, or what do we have to gain from experiencing these other time periods and people who have, walked the earth before us? And this is not me trying to imply that there is nothing. I'm implying that there's plenty of things. But just to ask you, what is there for us to gain by learning from these other cultures and people who walked before us?
Well, as part of that would be personal interest. For me, it was just a fascination I've had since I was a kid. So that's just curiosity, sense of adventure, to want to know other things that are outside of my daily realm. But from a more practical, I guess, universal, applicable standpoint, when you look at somebody, the way they lived, let's say, back in the Neolithic ages, or as close as approximation as we could get to that today, because there's nowhere except for a very few remote places that are really untouched, so to speak, or uncontacted by the modern world. But we still have vestiges of what humanity was a long time ago. We see ourselves. We see who we were at one time, and how we thought, and the myths that we develop in our minds, and the ways that we structure our lives and our religions and our societies. What we do now is still very similar to what people did a long time ago. We build mythologies, then we build religions around that, then we structure our societies around that. And obviously, it's developed. It's developed, of course, in ways that might look unimaginable to people from those days, and yet a lot of it is actually very similar. So
Right.
we can know ourselves better today by understanding our primal, who we were as primal people. So for me, on a personal level, that was something I always wanted to do, was just
Yeah.
understand people when I'm talking to them. Where are you coming from? Who are you? And if I see who you were 15,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago, again, just as best as I can, from what's available today, by going out to very, let's say, remote traditional people, I can understand you better than I could otherwise. Um, we can also learn a lot about philosophies and how people live and what are important and what kind of value systems are really important. And sometimes a lot of that, you hear so much about this already, so I don't want to sound cliche, but so much of that gets lost today in the race for whatever, the things that people think of are as important today, making sure they're on the career fast track, getting that promotion by a certain age, having a certain size house or a certain amount of net worth, or, the things that people strive for that may, that kind of are way far away from what we really need to be worrying about. Although they may be important, they're not necessarily of fundamental importance.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's a really unique perspective there and a great way to look at it. I want to dive a little bit into kind of your adventure more. And, we learned a little bit about what you can gain out of going into a journey like this. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about what you pulled out of it later on as well. But kind of walk me through, where's the first place that you went? You've packed everything up, you've put some things into storage, you've sold a bunch of stuff. Where did you start?
The first really big trip that I made in this long deal was to Papua New Guinea, the island of New Guinea, which is, if you're not familiar, well, I know you are, but sometimes some of the people there may not be familiar with that's where that's at. That's off the northern, little ways off the northern coast, I guess be the northeast coast of Australia. And I had been there before, once before, but that was on a diving trip. And so I made a few short land excursions while I was on that diving trip, and I had to go back. I mean, I had a really, really unusual experience, which I'm happy to share with you if you like now, or
Yeah,
I don't want to get too
totally.
far off track. Well, the first time I went to the island of up to Papua New Guinea, which is actually a split island. You have the Papua New Guinea on one island, part of the island on one side, and you have West Papua on the other side, which is owned by Indonesia. But anyhow, I was on this boat. We went off, went to shore. We had a few hours. There was like most of the divers. They went on this sort of tour with some local indigenous people or natives that were living there, and I didn't want to do the guided tourist thing. So, and it wasn't really much of a tourist thing because this is a pretty remote place. But I just wanted to do something on my own. So I hiked up a little hill, and I found this little cave that was overlooking the water, maybe 800 feet high or something. This wasn't that high of an elevation, but it was a nice little walk. And so I peeked into the cave. It was kind of a small, dark room. And it took me a while for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. But after a while, I kind of saw these shapes. And finally, it just got clear what I was looking at. I was looking at a room full of skulls that were stacked up, just stacked up in rows.
Wow.
And and then I kind of walked in a little bit, and it was a small place, but maybe about 8 feet high, and I don't know, 4 feet, 5 feet in depth, and maybe 6 feet wide. But eventually, I started really studying the skulls, and I thought, wow, this is really strange because they were all neatly stacked, and I noticed that every one of them had a hole. It was maybe about perhaps an inch in diameter in a similar spot. And I thought that was really odd. So I kept that in my mind. And then later on that evening, I asked the skipper of the boat, of our dive boat, as we were cruising along to our next dive destination. I said, well, ask him about that. And he explained to me that That was the hole in the skulls was from the ritualistic cannibalism that took place still in some parts of Papua New Guinea. He said essentially what people would do is they would take the when an ancestor, an older person would die, they would take the skull and they would puncture a hole in it, and they would pass it around at a gathering, and they would all consume a small piece of the brains of the ancestor, and the idea was is to imbibe the wisdom of those ancestors.
Wow.
And that was pretty interesting to me, and I said I have to come back to this place because he really told me some interesting stories. I mean, he'd been there for over the year, for many years. He'd been running dive expeditions in and out of the waters around Papua New Guinea, which is an amazing place to dive in and of itself because it's so remote. So anyhow, that was my first trip when I started this long journey. As I went to the island of New Guinea. I was there with my ex-wife, and she was a real trooper because it was a little bit of a tougher place to travel, but pretty amazing experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, was there ever a point where, for example, just did your travel go, you went out there and then you would come back to the United States, or did you find another place to go to after that?
I typically, what I did is I would go usually for 3 to 6 month journeys.
Okay.
And then I would use Thailand as a home base for a good deal of my long period that I was gone. I was gone for almost 6 years. So what I would do is I used Thailand because it was a good hub as far as to flight connections or what have you to the different parts of that hemisphere, that part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Even in Africa, it was much easier to deal for getting from Thailand to my entry point in Africa for the various trips I made in the African continent. It was obviously very easy to go from there to almost anywhere into Asia, and of course anywhere over the South Pacific. So typically I would make 3 to 6 month journeys, and then I would come back and I would stay in this little island called Samui, Koh Samui, down in southern Thailand, and spend a week or 2 weeks reading, exercising, trying to eating good food, and periodically if it was available, grabbing a good glass of wine, which I kind of missed, and I'd be planning and getting ready for my next set of journeys, doing the research, just all the things you need to do to prepare if you're going to take off again for 3 to 6 months. And generally that was a pattern. Once in a while, I'd come back to America for about a week, see my family or friends, or just take care of personal business. And but generally, my journeys would last 3 to 6 months. One period was over, I think it was about 11 months or 12 months straight in between breaks. And probably a couple times, and maybe it was just a couple months I was gone, and then I'd come back for a week or two to regroup and then go back out again.
That's awesome. And so while you're on these trips, one of the questions that's popping up for me is, you're away from family, friends, all sorts of people for such a long time, and I'm guessing you're a little more disconnected from, having a phone at the hip or having your email going off every 18 seconds like we have now. What was it like for you to be, I wouldn't say disconnected, but maybe separated or distanced from a lot of the things that you are used to, like friends and family, but also while you're on these trips, what about things like healthcare? How do you find a doctor, or if you have to go to the dentist, what happens in those cases?
It's funny you bring up dentistry. All my life I've been lucky. I've had perfect teeth. And the minute I'm at a remote place, I have this small crack in a back molar. It was like this huge pain. It was actually out in Peru, and the hills of Peru. I'd done a trip done the Inca Trail up to Machu Picchu, which is a sort of a popular thing to do, but it's still amazing. And then I was in some other areas that were a little bit more remote, and all of a sudden I was in a situation of having to find a dentist. So you just figure it out. I mean, I've found I've didn't get I'm lucky. I'm pretty healthy, pretty strong. So from a health standpoint, mostly I got through most of the years with only usually minor stuff. I did one time need surgery, actually pretty, surgery for a serious knee injury, which I had done in Cape Town in South Africa. And a few times I got hurt, but I would just have to get treated by somebody that was on somewhere that was local. So in that standpoint, you just make do.
Yeah.
I did carry around my own medical kit, which for all intents and purposes was fairly useless, other than I had like spare needles, for instance. If I ever needed a blood transfusion, I could hand somebody clean needles, so I know I wouldn't get a disease
Right, but no
from
dentistry
dirty needles.
tools.
Yeah, no dentistry tools. And to be honest with you, I started thinking, well, if I actually was hurt so badly or I needed a blood transfusion, how am I going to communicate to somebody? Well, hey, go back to my tent or my hut or the guest house I'm staying at and go find these needles and then come back here and give me the emergency transfusion. It's
And
like,
then we'll talk.
yeah, then we'll talk. Yeah, it's like it was just completely useless. But what came in handy was carrying around antibiotics.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
because you get sick. When you get sick, a
Right.
Cipro was my best friend for the first couple of years. I took it. I'm not recommending that people go self-medicate, but periodically, a round of Cipro did wonders to recover from some major, well, very very bad bout of stomach illness, which
Yeah.
every traveler kind of knows what I'm talking about.
So,
Um,
and that's on the medical side. Tell me a little bit about, the personal side. I mean, is it a lonely thing to be traveling and experiencing the world? I feel like you're so busy and experiencing things that you probably don't think about it nearly as much. But I mean, you're away from friends, family, connections, and I'm sure certain conveniences that back home you might have had that you might not have when you're out around the world. I mean, I know for me, like, I can walk to a Walgreens down the street, and if I need cough medicine, if I need a snack, if I need a birthday card, like, it's all right there, and I can walk there in
sure.
5 minutes. But I wouldn't expect that to be the same in some of the countries you might have gone to, especially if you're in Koh Samui on an island off of Thailand. I don't think that they have the same sort of conveniences. So how about, like, just being away from people that you knew and being distanced from a lot of those same conveniences? What was that like?
Well, partly I was accustomed to it in some ways because I'd done a lot of travel into more remote places or places that were just very different from what I was accustomed to. I'd done that on and off all my life, so I was a little bit accustomed to it. But I had done it for so long and constantly alone. The first 6 months of my journey, I started out, my ex-wife traveled with me. And she was a great traveler. She was a real trooper. She was strong, and she went for it. But for various reasons, she took a different path. We ended up taking different paths. And after about the first 6 months, she went on, did something else. So then I became on my own. And you learn how to be. First off, from a social standpoint, you learn how to become very social, which for me was pretty natural anyhow, so that wasn't a big transition. But you just start meeting people, you meet people everywhere you go. And generally, when you're in a place where it's very different from you, you're very different from them. And anybody you run, lots of people you run into are going to be curious about you. The more traditional, the more remote, the more tribal areas you get into, you can't go in there anonymous. People are going to meet you, or they're going to introduce you. You're going to have to meet somebody quite often because you can't even get around because you can't speak the language. You just can't go stumbling into places that aren't necessarily, they're somebody else's territory, so to speak. So even though I was alone, I wasn't never really alone. You're
Right.
always meeting local people. And quite often you're actually entrusting your life to those people too. Especially if you're going into conflict zones or failed states or post-conflict zones or pre-conflict zones, all of which I've spent time in. Um, and then as far as keeping up, let's say, with the modern world, I was pretty plugged into the modern world before I left. I developed a tech-based, software-based service. So so I'm somewhat of into the technology. Although I'm a salesman, not necessarily a technologist, or I've had a banking and finance background.
Right.
But I was still plugged in, and so what I would do is I would download magazines like The Economist magazine. I would every week, whenever I had access to modern communications, I would get the latest issue of The Economist magazine and read it cover to cover so I could kind of keep up what was going on in the world. I was always, of course, reading the news on the internet whenever I was at a place where you had internet access. I became an early subscriber to Skype, paid subscriber actually to their service, and would call people from the most strangest remote places. And people would ask, where are you? And they really didn't know when I'd call them, because I'd say, oh, well, I'm here, or such and such, And the other interesting thing that you find when you're traveling, even now, well, even then, and now it's even more so, but even then, you could be surprised how much modern communications had already gone into some of the most remote places. Even in tribal areas, let's say in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, there might be a missionary place, and they would have an internet connection via satellite.
Wow.
And you could go in there and use it for a few minutes, or pay them a little bit, or make a donation, or pay them a little bit, or what have you. There's always somewhere. It seemed like, not always, but quite often, there'd be things that you would just not expect that you could actually communicate. It might be slow, it might be tedious, it certainly wasn't convenient, but if you wanted to keep in touch, you could, at least at times. And that's what I did, So I kind of made it a point to make sure I kept in touch with my friends. At least, every few months I'd try to make calls to people. Obviously, as I said, I was keeping up with the local, with the international news. I had to take care of my own financial affairs and investments, which sometimes is a little rough to do because I would be out of touch for so long periods of time. But
right, like how do you pay taxes from the middle of an island in Thailand?
Actually, Thailand is I don't want to take the exoticness out of it, but Thailand's pretty modern in many ways.
Yeah, pretty well connected, I hear.
Yeah. So in Koh Samui, actually, I had complete access to full modern communications. They had good internet. I had my PC there, and so it was easy to communicate from there and do things. And that's actually why I would, that's what I would do. And when I was in between long journeys, is I would kind of catch up on everything. Yeah. So paying taxes. My accountant, he's still my accountant now. He's been my accountant for years and years. He was so helpful to me. He would just take care of stuff for me. All my financial things that were related to what he would do or could do for me, they just went to his address. And I have a brother who also really helped me out. I used, he was my official address. He's in Florida.
Okay.
And so things went to him, and periodically he would do me the favor of just looking out for certain things. And if something was important, he would help me make sure it got taken care of. And other than that, lots of things were just automated. I mean, I didn't have that many obligations, but the obligations I did have, they just got paid.
Right.
Because you and had even when I started back in 2000 and at the end of 2005, and then once again in 2006, I got injured when I first got started, so I had a little bit of a delay. But even then you could set up everything automatically, mostly anyway.
Well, yeah. Gary, I know that you documented this whole adventure in a book that you've written, and as we round off the episode, I think that we could probably go on for like 3 more hours on this, because this is the stuff I really love, is the travel. I'm getting ready to do a huge 9-country trip across Europe this summer, and so traveling is one of my favorites. But I really want to get everyone tuning in the opportunity to really read your whole story and in its entirety. What's the best place, and first, what's your book called? And then what's the best place for everyone to find and grab a copy of that?
Well, thanks for asking, and good luck, by the way, on your journey. My book is called The Last Places on Earth, Journeys in Our Disappearing World. And you can find it. It's in the Barnes & Noble bookstores, select Barnes & Noble bookstores. And you can find it online at Amazon.com and also, of course, at BarnesandNoble.com. And you can say it comes in hardcover, or actually paperback, so physical copy, or in the Kindle or the Nook versions.
Awesome. And then Gary, what's the best place for people to keep track of you and what you're doing? Is there, a good place online if anyone wants to get in touch or reach out to you?
Yes, they can come to my website. It's thelastplacesonearth.com.
Perfect. Well, Gary, thanks so much for being here today and sharing your story with us. I know that it was 6 years of time, so it's a little hard to condense into like a 30-minute episode, but I think that you had a great story there with Papua New Guinea, and also, the whole adventure and what you've learned from it, how you've changed from that has been awesome to share with the audience. So thank you again for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Zephan. It was a lot of fun.
Hey everyone, it's Zeph. Did you like this episode? Be sure to subscribe so that you can tune in next week and tell a friend about the show. If you want access to free training and exclusive interviews on success, happiness, lifestyle design, and adventure, visit me at yearofpurpose.com. Until next time, go out and let life surprise you so that you can live a life rescripted.